here, ready to talk to you about objectivity and its place in journalism. You know, surprisingly enough, even though journalists are synonymous with objectivity, there are other professions that are out there who need to be objective. I want you to think about that for a little bit and share with me your answers. I'm not going to give it to you. You have to think about that. But in addition to journalism, there are lots of other professions that really need to have objectivity in the workplace. And journalism is one of those that people often think of, or it comes first when people ask them this question. And believe it or not, it's not always been that way in the case of journalism. Some would say it's not even that way now. But in the 1830s, 1840s, when journalism really started to become a thing, it was not really thought of as an objective profession, because typically there were lots of people who had strong political aspirations or political alliances in the realm of journalism, and so they were all about promoting their particular individual. Again, sound familiar? But anyhow, so around the 1840s, 1848 exactly, the Associated Press was formed, and they felt like, hey, we're not getting anywhere. You're trying to up me, I'm trying to up you. So why don't we put our political alliances aside and try to produce content that is not biased and pushes people to decide which way they want to go. So that happened in the 1840s. You'll be reading a little bit more about that this week. And that also helped to diminish sensationalism just a little bit, but again, we have it still today. So the New York Times was in charge of building this informational model, which was one of the big catalysts in moving the movement of journalism during that time, which helped morph things as the creation of radio came onto the scene, more technological advancements with the telegraph, and prior to that, then the radio, then television, and then here we are in digital media land today. So you'll be learning a little bit about that, and I encourage you to think about whether or not it's a little bit unrealistic for journalists to be objective, because that is something that you'll be talking about later on in one of your assessments. But it's something for you to really contemplate as you navigate the potential of being in this field. You know, objectivity is really, really important, I think, as a former journalist, because personally, your requirement is just to come up with the facts and push them out there and let the people decide which way they want to go. But some people might disagree at this particular time. So I encourage you to read the reading this week to see where you stand with that. But it is important to know that generally associated with journalism, objectivity is really important, and it is a ritual, if you would, things that we are expected to be a part of as journalists. And there are three big things that typically influence it. The form, which is how stories are formatted, the content, which is what creates it, what makes it, what social reckonings are bringing news to the front this week. So the content, and then the interorganizational relationships, so people's involvement, news people specifically, who are building that content and are making it news. All right. So those are things that typically affect objectivity. And then also things that are important to make a story objective are as follows. The presentation of conflicting possibilities. So let's say that I'm a journalist and maybe my husband's company is accused of embezzlement. Well, if I know that I'm married to him, then I might not cover the story objectively, because I might be at risk financially, right? So that's one thing that's important and necessary, is if you have some kind of underlying bias, you need to out that and say, I can't cover this story. I can't do this story. The other big factor in making a story objective is the presentation of supporting evidence. So again, if I have something to lose and I don't push that evidence out there, then there might be a conflict of interest. So it's important that to make stories objective, presentation of any conflicts, presentation of any supporting evidence that I have, Then there's also this use of quotation marks or use of quotes. You know, a lot of people talk about, oh, it's on camera. This last election, it was, well, that we have her on camera saying that, or we have him on camera saying that. So a lot of times those things are used and can be used to make a story objective. And then also just the structuring of the information in a informational sequence is also exceptionally important when it comes to making a story objective. So other big things too involving objectivity and rituals that journalists often partake in involves the information in the certain alignment, and then as far as just truth in general. So oftentimes as a reporter, you're on a deadline, and so you have a certain amount of time to finish or to accomplish certain things, and oftentimes you are relying on, whether they're eyewitness on their accounts, you're relying on investigators, public information officers, whoever is considered an authoritarian or the top in their field in whatever the story is that you're on. You're relying on what they're telling you often because you don't have time to go back in this day and age of fact checking and fact checked everything, right? Sometimes you do, but sometimes you don't. So it's important that we have a relationship to where with your sources you trust them and you can know whether you're relying on them in a positive manner. And if it's not, then I guarantee you'll never forget that if they do something negative. The other big thing is that it's important for you to figure out where you are with your objectivity. How do you feel about things? How do you feel about each story? Are you analyzing yourself, self-analyzing yourself and seeing, are there any biases or things that I might be inflicting into this story? It's important to think about that because sometimes that could infringe upon your ability to report or to cover a story. All people tend to have some kind of bias or some kind of biases in some different way, but being able to control that and being able to be as objective as possible is something that is a technique that's a challenge, and it's something that you can craft over time and make really into a positive piece and help you to become a successful journalist.